Hello, my name is Joëlle Noirfalisse. As Angelo indicated, I have recently taken charge of the overall coordination of the LIFE NGO operating grounds. And I will be speaking to you today about what are the operating grounds, the type of organization we're targeting with the upcoming call, the nature and fields of their intervention, and then give you some more insight into the novelties that Angelo has already announced. So life operating grounds, what are they? The definition that has been given to them hasn't changed much. And in the new life regulation that covers the spans from 2021 to 2027, there is a dedicated article that defines what those operating grounds are. And they are there to support the functioning of nonprofit organizations, which, as it was the case in the past, are involved in the development, implementation, and enforcement of European Union legislations and policy, and which are primarily active in the fields of environment or climate action. And as previously announced, it's now including clean energy transition. The types of organization is pretty much remaining the same as it has been in the last years and in the previous program. We are looking at nonprofit organizations that are independent from political parties and commercial interests, and which are representing European civil society. Those organizations are usually with a network or with the structures that allows an access to the European institutions. And there are entities that have a specific environmental and or climate mission that including the fields of nature biodiversity and clear energy transition. These organizations need to have a clear European added value. And we really wish to emphasize strongly the need for you to carefully look at the eligibility criteria in order to assess whether or not your respective organizations are eligible under this call for proposals. Those organizations usually have a twofold role that we qualify as bottom-up and top-down, and the boundary between the two obviously is sometimes a bit blurry. But we would describe as bottom-up the function that these organizations have in terms of shaping European policies, channeling their member views to the European institutions and to Brussels, alerting policymakers about policies that have been identified at national, regional levels, participating in consultative groups or experts panels that are organized at EU level, and providing input to policy formulation. Their top-down function would be more in terms of supporting the implementation of the EU environmental and climate policy, including clear energy transition through campaigns, exchanges of best practices, awareness-raising events, and providing feedback to the Commission on problems and implementation observed at national level, at grassroots level. Their function can also include alarms on intervention in case of breaches of European legislation by member states, or preparing the ground for policy acceptance at national European level. So as previously mentioned, the main fields of interventions of the beneficiaries of operating grounds are environment, including nature and biodiversity, circular economy and quality of life, which is one of the new sub-program of the LIFE program. Climate action, that includes climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, and clean energy transition with renewable energy and energy efficiency. Our call for proposal this year will be a two-steps application, and we intend on launching the calls on the 13th of July 2021. And those two-step application foresee a framework partnership agreement call for proposal and a call for proposal for specific grant agreements. Both calls will have a deadline on a tentative deadline on the 28th of September 2021. And in order to be considered for a specific grant agreement, applicants will have to submit application forms to both calls for proposals. This is extremely important, but application forms need to be submitted to both calls for proposals. Successful applicants under the Framework Partnership Agreement call for proposal will sign a long-term partnership agreement, but only organizations that have actually signed a long-term partnership agreement will have their application forms considered for a specific grant agreement. So I reiterate the absolute need for applicants that wish to have a specific grant agreement signed to submit 2 application forms, one under the Framework Partnership Agreement call for proposal, and the other one under the specific grant agreement call for proposal. Both calls will be closing tentatively on the 28th of September 2021. There are a number of novelties. You got a taster of it through Angelo's introductory remarks. But the 2021 operating grant calls for proposals will have one additional thematic priority, which is the clean energy transition sector. In addition to that, the framework partnership will now cover a 3-year period instead of the 2 previously covered. So the call for framework partnership agreement this year will be for financial years 2022, 2023, and 2024. So if you missed this train, you've missed it for the next 3 years. As previously said, framework partnership agreement and specific grant agreement application and calls for proposals are in parallel, which wasn't the case in the past. This year, for time reasons, we've decided to launch both calls in parallel. And the maximum co-funding rate, as a nice novelty, is now 70% of total eligible cost of the beneficiary organization. There are a number of financial simplification which will be presented to you in the next slide. And another nice novelty is that the ceiling, which was previously imposed and which was preventing applicants from asking a greater amount than the previous one requested, is now lifted. However, there is still a maximum EU funding contribution set at 700,000 euros. Another novelty is that the LIFE program as a whole, and this includes the NGO operating grants, is now integrating the e-grant e-submission system. So if you want to familiarize yourself with it, the link will allow you to reach the participant portal and to browse through the different calls that are currently open. The live calls for proposals, including the operating grant calls for proposals, will be publicized through that portal, and applications will be through that portal. The fact that we are integrating the world of e-grant and e-submission also means that all our applicants will have to register in the participant register, and we invite organizations to already start registering their organization, if not already the case, in the participant register. Finally, we have a set of new application forms that will be presented to you in greater details by my colleague Eva. The big novelty of this goal, as already said on a number of occasions, is the financial simplification. We have, with the 2021 call for proposals for operating grant, decided to introduce what we call simplified cost option. And the specific simplified cost option that we're referring to here is a flat rate funding. So from now onwards, grant amounts will be calculated using a flat rate for all beneficiaries. And it will basically be based on a personal cost at actual cost plus a 50% of personal cost that will constitute the flat rate. And that flat rate will cover all other costs incurred by the beneficiary. So personal cost will be calculated at actual costs, while the flat rate will cover the rest at a rate of 50%. And this will include travel and subsistence, equipment and depreciation, subcontracting, rental, and other costs. This will simplify not only the application, but also the implementation and reporting process at a later stage. And as many of you might wonder why this 50%, this 50% flat rate has been established based on an analysis done of historical data, which showed a very strong correlation between the cost category of personal and the proportion of an approximately 2/3 of other costs over the past 6 years. So basically what we could observe is that personal costs were approximately 66% of an operating grant, and that 33 remaining percent were going to other expenditures. And that basically allowed us to define this 50% rate that we will apply to personal cost in order to define all other costs. And I will now leave the floor to my colleague Eva and wish you well in your application process.
Yes, hello, this is Eva Paparatti. I'm a project manager taking care of operating grants for non-profit making entities at CINEA. And I will now try to guide you through the application for a framework partnership agreement and specific grant agreement for operating grants. But before that, I would like to give you some overview on the previous operating grants call, just for reference. In fact, there was an indicative budget of 24 million euros for the 2 years. Which was a little lower than the budget that we have today. So 2 years ago, we received 48 applications with average shares of around 60% on environment and 39%, 40% on climate action. The total requested EU contribution was 29 million euros. So as you can see, we were a bit short with the budget. This is what happens regularly. So only the best proposals actually go through and are selected for funding. Yeah, there is a quite harsh competition, and therefore it's important that your application really meets all the criteria. Last time then, 38 organizations were selected for funding in 2020 and 2021 that they're currently funded. The average grant was around 360,000 euro per year. And the average EU funding rate was 42% of eligible costs. So it wasn't the maximum for all. A lot of organizations actually requested less than the 60% that was allowed, while now it's important to keep in mind that the funding rate goes up to 70%. Here is an overview of the evaluation results of last FPA call. In 2019, there were 48 applications, out of which one was found ineligible, one failed the award selection. 38 were selected for funding, and 8 were in the reserve list, meaning that they passed the whole evaluation process, but unfortunately the budget wasn't sufficient to fund them, and therefore they were not selected for funding. Now, a few words on the thematic priorities of the applicants that were selected in 2019. We have, first of all, the most important thematic priority, while keeping in mind that most of the operating grants beneficiaries cover more than one thematic priority. The most important was greenhouse gas emission reduction, so climate change mitigation. Then there was also a very important thematic priority was biodiversity. Then environment and health, climate adaptation, energy, resource efficiency, agriculture, water, finance, waste, and so on. And we can see, in fact, that these thematic priorities are also in line with most of the worries of the European citizens. So we understand that it really comes from the civil society. This is the list of the organizations that are funded currently, so 2020, 2021. I'm not going through all of them. I just want to highlight the 4 newcomers, those organizations that were never funded before, which are agroecology, Client Earth, Ecolese, and the Institute for European Environmental Policies. These are newcomers in the operating grants scheme of the LIFE program. So each time we hope to attract more newcomers, and 2 or 3 or up to 4 newcomers for every call. Now it's time to go through the actual application for framework partnership agreement, and then we'll go through the specific grant agreement as well. So as Joëlle was saying, the tentative dates for the call opening and closing are 13 July and 28 September respectively, but this will be confirmed in the website later on. There is first, as we said, a 3-year framework partnership agreement that will cover the years from 2022 to 2024. And there, in the application, we ask you to focus on the organization's 3-year strategy with an outline of activities that can be based on activities already known, on the experience from the previous years, or of course also on what you expect from the EU agenda, how it will develop and how your activities will follow up on that. We would advise to distinguish between first, second, and third year of the application, so that it will be easier also for you to apply for the specific grant agreement, which is annual. And then in the framework partnership agreements, keep in mind that we don't ask for financial details. This will be asked at the SGA stage. We only ask for the total costs of the organization over the 3 years, and what will be the EU funding requested. And this is needed for 3 reasons. First, because we need to assess the financial viability of the organization. Then because, as I said before, there is a budget cutoff due to the fact that the budget generally is not sufficient to cover for all the satisfactory applications. And the last reason is that we need to assess the value for money of the application, and this is needed especially in case of proposals with equal score. Then the proposal which is assessed as best value for money will get the funding over the other one in such cases. Also keep in mind that for the framework partnership agreement, there are no revisions, only for the specific grant agreement. Now quickly on the SGA application, and then we will go through more in detail the application forms. So as for the FPA, it's the same opening date and the same closing date. So as Joëlle already said and repeated, it's important to meet the deadline of the calls closing, because it's the same deadline for both calls. For the specific grant agreement, it's for now this is the first call, the first SGA call for the first financial year, so next year 2022, which for most organizations starts on the 1st of January 2022, but for some organizations can start later, for instance in March or in April or in June. This, in any case, the specific grant agreement is always covering the financial year of the organization. For the next years, 23 and 24, there will be invitations for proposals. So there will be closed calls restricted to only the framework partners. This SGA then, it's the annual work plan of the organization, but only focused on the activities that you want funded by the operating grant. As we said already, the budget will be calculated as staff costs, or as real costs, plus 50% of the staff costs, a flat rate. The award criteria are much more limited for the SGA than for the FPA, because the main selection is done at the FPA level. And for the SGA, as we said, there might be a revision, although we will assess whether the Sga application really needs a revision, or it can be a full revision or a simplified revision, or no revision at all if it's not needed. Now, a few words on the evaluation before we go through the actual application. This is how the evaluation is done. There is a pre-assessment by external independent evaluators, experts that are selected by CINEA with the help of an external consultant. Then there is, at the end of the assessment by the evaluators, a final assessment by the evaluation committee, which is composed by CINEA, the executive agency, DG Environment, DG Climate Action, and now also DG Energy of the European Commission. The list of selected organizations then is established in consensus by the evaluation committee. Now, just to explain how we go from the framework partnership agreement to the specific grant agreement selection. Well, the experts and then the evaluation committee will establish a ranked list of proposals based on the scores of the proposals that go, of course, from very good to satisfactory to unsatisfactory. What happens, as we said, very often the satisfactory proposals are not all selected for funding because of the budget limitation. So those that are not eligible or not admissible are not selected at all. Those that are sufficient but below the budget threshold will be will compose the reserve list, and those that are above the budget cutoff are selected for funding. Now, those will sign the framework partnership agreement, but if some of the framework partners are failing at the stage of specific grant agreement, or if for any reason they are not submitting an SGA proposal, then we will go back to the reserve list, and we will call and ask the reserve list candidates to submit or to go through the revision, if in this case the SGA's proposal has already been submitted, and they will be invited to sign a framework partnership agreement and a specific grant agreement. Now, an indicative timeline of the calls. Well, the publication, as we said, it's for now planned mid-July. Then the calls closing is planned on 28 September. The evaluation would probably run until the end of this year. Then we are planning to notify the applicants at the beginning of next year of the results of the evaluation. So after the evaluation committee has decided on the list of applicants to be funded, we hope to be able to sign framework partnership agreements and start the specific grant agreements revision between January and March next year, and to sign the SGAs by the end of April 2022. And in any case, we hope to be able to sign all FPAs and all SGAs by mid-2022, with the first pre-financings following shortly. Few words about the budget, but my colleague Anne Vermalen will give you a lot more details about that later on. The indicative budget is 12.370 million euros per year. So multiplied per 3 years, that is 37.11 million euros for the 3 years of the FPA. Now, every year in the past, we have funded around 35 NGOs, well, currently 38, depending on what is the amount that each NGO is requesting, compared also to the available budget. Now, we already said the maximum EU funding is 70% of total eligible costs, and the maximum grant is 700,000 euros per year. This hasn't changed. Now, quickly on the admissibility. This is the first check that is done on the proposals. In fact, a proposal, it cannot be accepted if it's late, if it's incomplete, or if the applicant is in a situation of exclusion, meaning, for instance, bankruptcy, fraud, corruption, and so on. Of course, this means that it's important not to miss the deadline, to apply for both FPA and Sga, as my colleagues were saying before, to use the correct application forms in the participants portal of the grants, to make sure the proposal is complete and that it includes all annexes detailed in the calls. Now, of course, it's important to read the calls to make sure that you don't miss anything, but in case something is missing or an application form is not complete, we will contact the applicants. But it's, of course, it would result in a waste of time and in a later selection and in a later signature of the grants. So we recommend that everybody is reading the calls so that there are no problems with the applications and no delays consequently. So eligibility criteria, I think Joëlle already went through them, but just to be sure, I would recommend that all applicants, especially newcomers, would self-assess their organization to make sure that it's eligible before they apply. The eligibility criteria of the operating grants calls are quite stringent. So it's important that an organization is compliant with all these criteria before it applies. So the applicants must be non-profit making legal entities, which are independent from public authorities, from the government, from political parties, from commercial interests. They must be active in the field of environment and or climate action, including clean energy transition with an environmental or climate objective. And the proof of this, we will check the statutes to make sure that it's the case, that the organizations, this is the primary objective of the organization. These non-profit making entities must be aiming at the public good and not a particular interest, at sustainable development, at the implementation and enforcement of European Union environmental or climate policy and legislation, now including, once again, clean energy transition. They must be active at European Union level with a structure and activities covering at least 3 European Union member states. This is also quite important. So this can be checked easily through the statutes, the website, or other documentation. Now, the following checks are called selection criteria, which include operational capacity of the organization. This is based on the assessment of the professional competencies and qualifications of the staff. This we see normally in the participant information form, as I will describe later, and from the recent activity report of the organization, and the financial capacity, which is based on the assessment on the financial viability of the organization. And this is based on auditor certified accounts and the annual statements of profit and loss to demonstrate that the organization has stable and sufficient sources of co-funding through the 3 years of the Framework Partnership Agreement. This is done at FPA level. Then to assess the quality of the proposals, we have award criteria, both for the FPA and for the Sga. First, for the Framework Partnership Agreement, there are 5 award criteria with 20 points each maximum. So for a total maximum score of 100 points. Now, some of them are weighted so that the weighted score will be 80 points maximum. And the overall pass threshold will be of 45 points, meaning that proposals must obtain at least 45 points as a weighted score to pass the award selection. The criteria are: 1, relevance; 2, EU policy shaping; 3, EU policy implementation; 4, sense of function; and 5, organizational development. I will go now more into detail about the award criteria. So first award criterion is about the relevance of the applicant's contribution to the objectives of the LIFE program. The extent to which the work plan is in line with the policies covered by the call for proposals, and the extent to which the proposal demonstrates European Union added value. Award criterion 2, European Union policy shaping. This is what Joëlle was describing as this bottom-up approach, how the non-profit organization is planning to use the network to shape the European Union policies. And of course, in order to do that, they have to show an in-depth understanding of the EU policy process. They have to improve or be able to improve the knowledge and evidence base to support the Union's environment, climate, and energy policies. They must foster the integration of environmental, climate, or energy policies into other policies that are relevant, like, for example, agriculture, transport, or cohesion policies. Then they have to show that the applicant will act as a channel between the civil society and the European Union institutions by providing coordinated policy inputs for the future policies, and that they have the appropriate means and structures to voice the concerns of EU citizens, in particular the civil society sectors that they represent, and to ensure their democratic representation in relation to the relevant institutions. Award criterion 3, EU policy implementation. This is what Joëlle was describing as a top-down approach or a function of the NGOs. Their organizations, applicants, have to propose a strategy that would improve the implementation and the enforcement of European Union environmental, climate, or energy legislation, either at member states or at European level. Then they will show that they act as a channel between the EU level and the civil society, also by promoting and ensuring acceptance of EU policy implementation in these fields. Then the applicant will show how the network is used to identify obstacles to policy implementation that might be at national or regional level, and how they use this information for policy feedback. Then we have to also assess the appropriateness and the quality of the measures that will be used to communicate and disseminate the activities of the applicants in order to create leverage. And then also the strategy, how it helps to secure investment for the environment, climate or energy policies, also addressing environmental externalities. Work Criterion 4 stands for function. This will focus on the capacity of the applicant to detect new or emerging issues in the areas of environment, climate change, or energy, and whether the applicant is able to analyze the causes and possible effects of such issues. This criterion also will assess the capacity of the applicant to propose appropriate solutions to these issues and to provide feedback to the relevant institutions for improved policy making. Now, last but not least, Work Criterion 5 is on organizational development, because we want our beneficiaries to use the operating grants to develop their organization and their network. This work criterion will focus on the strategy of the applicant to identify the needs of its organization and the areas of improvement, on its capacity to represent the relevant stakeholders and to develop its membership. So it's important to have a grassroots membership to make sure that civil society is represented by the organization. Then the extent to which the fundraising strategy of the applicant is adequate to ensure diversification and sustainability of the organization. Then we will also analyze the applicant's dependence of on the operating grants. This is especially for applicants that are in the scheme already, that need to assess their dependence on the operating grant and to propose strategies to address this dependence. Then this is also where we assess the value for money of the proposed work program. As we said, there are different reasons to assess the value for money. Also because lifting the ceiling, we want to still to make sure that the budget is adequate and that it's a good value for money compared to the work program. Now, I will give you some guidance on how to prepare the proposal, both for the FPA and for the SGA. So as Joëlle was pointing out, proposals must be submitted electronically via the Funding and Tenders portal. And it's important to use the forms that are provided inside the system. And you may remember, for those who have applied in the past, that it was much more complicated because we had a paper submission system. Now this is over. I think this is good news. So paper submissions are not allowed anymore. Now we have application forms which are online. The first part is called Part A. It's entirely online. It's about administrative information of the applicant. And it also includes the summarized budget for the FPA work program. Then there is application form Part B. This is actually an application form that will be downloaded by the applicant, then completed independently, and then once it is completed and saved, it must be re-uploaded in the system. And this part contains the technical description of the work plan. So it's probably the most important part that will be used for the award evaluation. Then last part of the application is part C. Like part A, it will be filled exclusively online. And this is about performance indicators of the proposal. Now, more in detail, for the application form part B for the Framework Partnership Agreement, there is a limit of maximum 90 pages for this, the entire technical description of the FPA strategy and work plan. Applicants are requested to use English if possible, and to carefully follow the instructions contained in the template. Please do not delete the instructions. They will stay in the template, and therefore the 90 pages include also the instructions. Applicants are requested to be clear, to avoid jargon and acronyms. But of course, this is generally something that is impossible to avoid. And in this case, we ask you to please include a glossary if it's needed, if it's about acronyms that are not easy to understand for everybody. Then please keep in mind that these application forms are standard application forms. Therefore, when we request your project's name and acronym, in fact, we refer to the organization's name and acronym. We ask you to always make sure that proper background and context is provided so that we always know what you are talking about in the application form. Then, more into detail, the first sections of the Part B application form are on relevance first and impact, where we ask about the profile of the organization with a description of the organization, the structure and the activities of the applicant and the members, although I must remind you that it is a mono-beneficiary grant. So we want to know what the members are doing, how they will contribute, if they will. But keep in mind that members' costs are not eligible for operating grants. We will also ask the mission, vision, and objectives of the multi-annual strategy, the contribution to European Union policies, and the policy priorities. This is just a tick boxes exercise where we will ask you to just assess what are the main focus areas of your application. For example, water, waste, climate change mitigation, and so on. And then we also ask you to give an assessment of the share of environmental, climate, or energy policies in your proposal. Then for impact, we will focus more on the problems that are targeted, on the evidence base, on the target groups, the outreach that is expected, and the impact of the activities that are proposed. Then there is a section on implementation. And this is the multi-annual action plan with a list of work packages that can be also presented in the form of a chart or any other type of graphic presentation. Then we want you to present your activities in work packages by thematic areas, if you wish, or you can organize the work packages as you prefer. But we would advise you to divide activities by year of implementation. Therefore, for each thematic area, you can have a first part on the first year, second on the second, and third on the fourth year of the FPA. Work package 1 should cover for all organizations only organizational development. while work package 2 and the following work packages are used for the all the other activities that are planned, which normally correspond to the different policy areas. You can copy and paste work package 2 template as many times as you want to create the work packages by work area. So depending on the number of work areas that you want to include in your proposal. Now, last sections of the part B of the FPA application. These include a timetable first. In this case, well, you will see there are two timetables. One for projects of less than 2 years, sorry, and one for proposals of more than 2 years. In the case of the framework partnership agreement, of course, you will use the timetable for projects of more than 2 years. Then there is a section on communication and visibility of European Union funding. It's important that you use the LIFE logo and the disclaimer, and not the European Union logo in the case of LIFE grants. Then section on resources, meaning management of the work program, the measures that you plan to ensure good quality, monitoring, planning, and control of the work program implementation. The way you intend to manage your budget, so the financial management. There is a table for multi-annual budget estimate, where you will insert only very general values and based, of course, on the staff costs with the calculation of the flat rates included there, and also most important, the actual amount of EU funding that you request, which will be used to also calculate the percentage rate of EU funding. Then there is the last section on risk management. This is new as well. This is for you to assess what are the possible risks, for instance, the changing EU agenda or changes in the composition of your membership, and how you are planning to mitigate those risks. So for the FPA application, some annexes are required, and these mandatory annexes to be uploaded in the system together with the rest of the application are the statutes of the organization, the applicant's activity report of the previous year, the participants' information, which is a description of the main staff who will be involved in the work program of the organization. And this will replace the CVs. So no CVs will be required, only the participants' information, and a list of the members of the executive board or the administrative body with names and title or function of these members of the executive board within the applicant organization. Now, a couple of slides on the application forms for the specific grant agreement for the first year, which is 2022. Okay, as you know, part A, administrative information, is already filled in the FPA application, and we don't need to have it twice, of course. So we will focus on part B. In the case of SGA, there is a limitation to 45 pages maximum for the entire part B. Once again, we prefer English because that's the language that all our experts speak, and also at CINEA, it's a common working language. We ask the applicants to avoid jargon and acronyms, but to include a glossary if acronyms are there. Just a quick reminder, this is not new, but funding for third parties, like or including members and volunteers costs are not allowed for operating grants, although of course subcontracting is allowed. So I mean, with certain specific rules that are generally the procurement rules of your organization. For the relevance, this is the first of the SGA award criteria. We want the applicants to focus on the contribution of the specific grant agreement of the first year to the framework partnership agreement strategy. So basically, we accept that applicants kind of copy paste from the framework partnership agreement into the specific grant agreement application, because we want to make sure that they are aligned, that the specific grant agreement will actually implement what was planned in the framework partnership agreement, because that's how the applicant was selected. So it's important that the activities are actually implemented in the specific grant agreement. For the second award criterion, implementation, we ask you to basically list the work packages, or even this can be done through a graphic presentation. And then the actual work packages where you can actually list the activities. Once again, it's structured exactly the same as in the framework partnership agreement application, meaning work package 1 will be for all organizational development, and then work package 2 and the following will be activities by thematic areas, following the same structure as the FPA, but of course, that would be specific for each applicant, then according to their areas of intervention. A last slide on the application forms for the specific grant agreement. We ask you to give us your work plan on communication, dissemination, and visibility of funding, as I said before, on internal management, on risk management, and a declaration on other EU operating grants, because we want to avoid double funding. So you must declare if there are other grants that might be redundant. The timetable in this case, unlike the ones that was used for the FPA, this is the first timetable that must be chosen for the SGA projects up to 2 years. But of course, you will fill only the part for 1 year. And the last section is about resources, which includes the estimated budget. In this case, for the SGA, you will go more into detail, but basically only personal cost, flat rate, and the total requested EU contribution. Well, first the total eligible costs, which is personal cost plus the flat rate, and the requested EU contribution, which is a part of the total eligible costs. And that can be calculated as a percentage of the total eligible cost that goes up to a maximum of 70%. But you will get a lot more information on the financial parts of the application from my colleague Anne Vermalen, who is head of sector of the financial team at CINEA, and who will now present the financial issues related to the calls. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you all the best for your application and for your future endeavors.
Welcome everybody to the financial side of the presentation of the NGO Call 2021. I will guide you through some reference material, how to establish the budget, the forms that you will need to fill, and the eligible and the ineligible costs. So first of all, some reference material that you can consult to deliver a good financial proposal. First of all, you have the EU Funding and Tenders portal, which you might already be familiar, where you can find the online manual for the submission of the proposal, where you will also find all the grant agreements of the calls, including the operating grant flat rate, master grant agreement, and the framework partnership agreement. Next to that, you will also then have rules for legal entity validation, LEAR appointment, and financial capacity assessment that is needed for those entities that have not yet been registered in this EU Funding and Tenders portal. Then there is, of course, the live call document, which I really think you should read. And then, of course, the grant agreements. And there is also an annotated grant agreement that will help you understand better the provisions of the grant agreement. Next to that, there is the live regulation and the multi-annual work program. So, for establishing your budget, there are some tables that you will need to complete. In the part A, this means online, you will have a summarized budget table for the framework partnership agreement as well as for the specific grant agreement. So this is an overall budget table for the beneficiary per cost category. In this case, there are only two. And you will have to, for the FPA, you will have to put the budget for different years, the different years that are listed in the call. And then for the SGA, it is just for the year under consideration. So for, I think, the 2021 year. Then in the annex, you will have a detailed budget table that needs to be uploaded. So it is a detailed budget per staff function. I can only ask you to be realistic when you define the amounts for your budget, because of course you get evaluated based on that. Then I just did the print screen to show you how it will look like online, the tables that you need to complete. This is, for example, the one from the framework partnership agreement, where you have different lines for, of course, the different years under consideration. For the SGA, the specific grant agreement, it's much shorter because, of course, it is only dealing with the year under consideration. So you see that also there you have to put the personal costs for the work program activities, and then there is the flat rate on the personal cost, which is 50%. There will be this additional annex, which is compulsory and that you will have to complete in Excel. So you will have to detail for each function or the name of the person, if you already know it, the monthly rate of the staff. And then you will have for the different work packages, the number of person months that you will have to include. And this will then in the end give the overview of the total eligible cost for that call. Then I would like to ask you to check also Article 6 of the grant agreement, which deals with eligible and ineligible costs. Remember only to include amounts in euro. You can only receive, as an applicant for an operating grant, only one operating grant per financial year from the budget of the European Union, and under no circumstances shall the same cost be financed twice. So if you're also involved in action grants, you have to make sure that the same cost is not claimed twice. The earliest starting date for the expenditure is the date of the start date of your budgetary year, which cannot be earlier than the 1st of January 2022. Then when we look at the eligible costs, we first go to the actual costs that you can include in your budget. And these are the costs related to personnel. So they will need to be actually incurred during the duration of the project. Of course, except for the final reporting, for which you will have a number of months after the end of the project, also for the audit certificate that might need to be submitted. Of course, it should be costs that belong to the budget categories of the call. In this case, the direct cost is only staff costs, so personal costs. They should be directly related to the action and necessary for the implementation. So you cannot include costs that are established through cost drivers. So it should be really costs that are directly linked to the implementation. then they should be identifiable and verifiable in the accounts of the beneficiary. So you can only include costs that relate to your own organization and that are in your accounts. So it is not possible to include, for example, costs of your affiliated entities, since it is a mono-beneficiary grant. Then you need to be compliant, of course, with the applicable national law on the taxes, labor and social security, and all the costs that you will budget and declare later on should be reasonable and justified, and they need to comply with principle of sound financial management. When we go to the flat rate part of the costs, which is limited to 50% of the direct personal costs, then they, of course, have to be declared under the correct budget category. I think that in the tables, it will be the category D, D1. Costs to which the flat rate is applied need, of course, be eligible. So all the staff costs that you would include there would need to be eligible in the end. And then they should be related, of course, to the period of the action, except the final reporting, as I already mentioned. Then for the funding of the eligible cost, the system itself will calculate a theoretical maximum amount of the EU funding that you can request based on the 70% funding rate. Of course, there is an additional limitation, you know, of the 700,000 euro. And this is something that you will need to keep in mind, because as beneficiary or applicant, you will have to enter manually the EU funding requested. You don't need to ask the maximum amount that the system calculates. You can reduce this if you receive funding from other co-financers, or if there would be income from the project, or you just want to fund yourself a higher amount. And of course, always limited to the 700,000 euro. Then the maximum amount of the grant is the maximum grant amount that is decided by the EU. So if you would request more than the 700,000 euro, this is going to be kept. At the time that you arrive at final payment stage, if you're lucky to get the grant, then the amount that we will finance will never be higher than the amount that was fixed in the grant agreement. Normally, you would receive a pre-financing of 60% of the union contribution. This can be exceptionally lower if, for example, we would require a financial guarantee, or if you would not be able to provide a guarantee, if we will split the pre-financing in several installments. So then it might be maybe 30 instead of 60. The final payment is then maximum, of course, 40%. When we look at the personal costs, then what are these eligible costs? When are they eligible, these staff costs? So it are costs for the employees or equivalent. It's limited to their salary, social security contribution, taxes, and other costs that are linked to the remuneration, only if they arise from national law or from their employment contract or an equivalent appointing act. Then you can also have natural persons or seconded persons that were hired. Of course, they then will work under another type of contract than a direct employment contract. And the seconded persons, of course, you can only claim them if you had to pay for them. So not if they were given to you for free. And for those two categories of costs, you would need to take into account that they should work under conditions that are similar to those of an employee. So the way the work is organized, that the tasks have to be performed, and where that they have to be performed. And the result of this work should normally belong to the beneficiary. Then how do we calculate these costs, and how do you need to budget them? So first of all, you will have to estimate the annual salary cost of the person, and then you will have to divide the number of the total annual salary cost by 215 days to arrive at the rate per day. We say 215 days. This is now standard. We will later on, we will no longer use the overall timesheet amount per year for dividing the annual salary cost. It is fixed at 215 days for everybody. And then you will multiply the daily rate with the number of days equivalent worked on the action. So you round it to the nearest half, and then you will have the total cost. You can, of course, not declare in the end, if you would have received the grant, declare more than 215 days, because if you would do that, you would declare more than the annual salary cost of the person. So it's limited to 215 days per person per year. Then you have the cost for natural persons and seconded persons. There you will have to look in their employment contract. So it will depend on what is written in their agreement, what you will then charge to the project. So mostly for natural persons, they are like consultancy type persons. They might have a daily rate or an hourly rate in their contract. Maybe just to mention also that for these natural persons, they cannot be hired through their own company. So because if they are hired through a company, they are considered under the subcontracting. So it is very important to take this into account. Then we have the ineligible costs. And these are in fact the costs that do not comply with the definition of an eligible cost. So it would be excessive or reckless expenditure, deductible or refundable VAT, or in-kind contributions by third parties. I just listed the ones that would be those that we could consider frequently for an NGO operating grant, but you will see in the grant agreement there is more in the list. So also the costs or contributions declared under other EU grants, or it could also be grants that are awarded by another EU member state, a non-EU country or another body that implements the EU budget, that those amounts are then not eligible. So otherwise you would have double funding. So this concludes my presentation. I hope it was helpful, and we will now move back to Eva, who will explain something on the monitoring of your grant.
Hello again. I just have a couple of more slides before the conclusion of this info day on operating grants, and it's to present you, if you don't know them already, the monitoring team of the operating grants, and it's a consortium that is called NEMO. For those who don't know them yet, it's a team that follows up on the activities of the grant beneficiaries. And this is done in cooperation with the executive agency, CINEA. It monitors all life beneficiaries, not only operating grants, but it's important to underline that they are not auditors, although some of them have an auditor background, but they are really monitors, financial and technical monitors. And so their main objective is to provide feedback to the European Commission and CINEA, the granting authorities, and to help the beneficiaries to implement their activities in line with the conditions that are laid down in the grant agreements. So in a nutshell, here is what the NEMO technical and financial monitors do. They assess the beneficiaries' annual reports, and they give feedback to CINEA. They go on monitoring visits. They visit the beneficiaries regularly. Generally, they select 10 NGOs every year. So you may see one of them, who will request you, if it's possible, to visit, and then you will agree on a date. And then the visit will really aim at supporting your work and to make sure that you are complying with the grant conditions. And last but not least, they also propose highlights for the LIFE brochure, which is then published on the LIFE website, and which highlights the main achievements and the successes of our beneficiaries. So here are some faces of the monitoring team. The coordinator is Ivona. And then we have Robert, Georgia, Claudia, Jean-Luc, Christy, Inga, and Laurence. So these are the persons who might come to visit you if you are selected for funding. And sometimes the project managers or the financial managers from CINEA also join them during the visits. So just to conclude, these are our contacts and our social networks. If you want to keep in touch with us, you're very welcome to do so. And I would insist on the importance of using the website, but especially the functional mailbox for any questions you might have on the operating grant call. Please, you can send an email to this mailbox, CINEA Life NGO at ec.europa.eu. This you can also find on the website, and we will reply to you as soon as possible. But then for the most important questions, we will also publish them in frequently asked question documents that will be regularly published on the website. So that's it for me. Once again, I wish you all the best for your application. And I thank you for your attention. Goodbye.